Today in Cloud Gaming News, we're going to be talking about the biggest headlines making their way around the web. We have stories for Xbox, but we're going to start on a big story for Stadia. And this one will excite quite a few fans out there because FIFA 22 will be having a crossplay test for the following platforms: PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and Google Stadia. It's worth pointing out that it will be happening in the near future with no specific date given, and that crossplay functionality will be restricted to online seasons and online friendlies only. After all, it is a test. They even went on to state the following: while we want to enable our players to play with as many friends and others as possible, we limited the test to these two modes with the aim of reducing the chance for introducing new issues into the game. We are confident that the game data and feedback that we get from these two modes will help inform how crossplay could further be implemented in future titles. This is fantastic news through and through. As we all know, Stadia does have an issue when it comes to multiplayer matchmaking when a game doesn't support crossplay. Even with a game like FIFA 22 and as popular as it is, it still struggles to find players to play with at certain times of the day. On the Stadia side of things, this is going to alleviate that issue completely. But even more important than that is the possibility that this might bode well for the future of the franchise on Google Stadia as well. One could easily argue, why bother doing these tests on Stadia if it wasn't a platform they plan on supporting in the future? Especially when they've emphasized that the testing nature of this is to improve the future iterations of the franchise and the integration of crossplay support in those entries. Obviously, this is an official confirmation and it shouldn't be treated as such, but I will say it's the first big piece of good news toward that being a possibility. Look, I'm no FIFA player myself, but I know that this is going to be a huge deal for many fans out there, especially those playing on Stadia. I'll be sure to let you all know as soon as the testing goes live so you can hop on and play with others around the world. But that's far from the only good news we have to share about Stadia today. The next bit comes from the indie developer behind 100 Days Winemaking Simulator. Recently over on Twitter, they decided to share some data about the profit and revenue coming in from the game from various platforms. Among them was Stadia Pro, and a surprising 21.7% of the revenue came directly from it. To put that into perspective, it's more than the Switch, Epic Game Store, and GOG made combined. That's a very respectable chunk of the pie, so much so that the developer themselves went on to suggest that every indie dev that has a game with joystick input should bring their game to Stadia, because they could be missing out on a potential 20 to 25% of revenue. Now, it should go without saying that this is obviously talking about indie development where investment and budgets are smaller in scale than AAA, and I think that's exactly where the Google Stadia developer incentives are targeting to get people to bring their games over to Stadia Pro as soon as they launch. We've discussed those very incentives plenty of times in the past, so I won't bore you with the details here, but I would look at this graph once again to really showcase just how much of a boost it is. After all, Stadia Pro is separated from Stadia in income distributions. Only 2.9% came from Stadia compared to Stadia Pro's 21.7%, and to me that speaks volumes. It's also a pretty good explanation as to why we're starting to see some more and more indie games make their way to Stadia, and why plenty of those that end up making their way over actually launch directly into Stadia Pro as soon as they're available. This is proof that the incentives are working for indie development, and it should lead to more great indie games making their way over to Stadia. While I'm sure some people are going to be upset that they're not focusing on AAA titles, I think it's actually the right play because this can guarantee a steady stream of great games arriving to the platform. If they can secure just a few great AAA titles throughout the year, these indie games can definitely fill the gaps between them. But now let's move on to the last bit of Stadia news happening both on the back end and the front end for us users. As many have noticed, the store UI has changed a bit when you click on a specific game. Not only that, but the URL is now specific and unique to each title. This is great because not only does it look better in my opinion, but I think having the unique URLs will definitely make sharing store pages much easier than ever before. Now, I'm not going to try and sell you on this being a huge major change that's going to change everything around for Stadia, but I do think it's positive and I hope more UI changes are on the way. But what may have more of an impact is something that was recently discovered in an APK insight from 9to5 Google. It appears that game-specific touch controls may actually be on the way to Google Stadia when playing from a mobile device. This is very similar to how Xbox Cloud Gaming works with their game-specific touch UI. And I will say it works fantastically over there, and it definitely improves the experience because I really don't think just emulating a controller on a touchscreen is good enough. Sometimes the button placements just don't make sense, and being able to make them designed specifically for each game will go a long way on making them playable through touch. In addition to this, it also seems like 1440p streaming may very well be on the way. For those confused about that, I'm talking specifically about mobile devices. 1440p streaming already exists on PC and laptops, but mobile mobile devices have been restricted to 1080p, and there are plenty of displays out there with a much higher resolution. And while I will say the option is very much so welcome, I do wonder at what point it's overkill to have such a high resolution for such a tiny screen. 1080p really does look pretty good on a mobile phone after all. But with that, we've wrapped up all the Stadia headlines there is to catch up on. Now let's move over to the Xbox side of things. And the first of it comes from Microsoft themselves, stating that more than 10 million people have streamed games on Xbox Cloud Gaming. That number was shared during the company's third quarter's earnings call directly from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella himself. The number itself is very impressive, but it shouldn't be too much of a surprise considering just how many people are subscribed to Game Pass Ultimate. And if you've subscribed to that service, you already have access to something that could take advantage of the cloud opportunities that Xbox provides. There's not too much else to add here, but I do think it's very important to share this type of news because it shows some really big growth in the cloud gaming space. More and more people are starting to become aware of what cloud gaming is and the benefits it provides. Xbox Cloud Gaming has also been doing a great job of pushing things forward for their own service and improving it as time goes on. While I wouldn't call it perfect by any means, I would definitely argue that it's in a much better spot now than the state it launched in. At the end of it, 10 million people streaming through Xbox is 10 million players playing in the cloud, and that's nothing but a good thing for everyone in the space. The last bit of cloud gaming news for Xbox I needed to bring up is the fact that the Xbox and Bethesda Game Showcase has been slated for June 12th. This is where we'll see all the latest and greatest from Team Xbox and everything their first-party studios are working on. All their first-party titles are guaranteed to be hitting Game Pass Ultimate and will be available through the cloud through Xbox game streaming. And I'm sure this year's Game Showcase is going to be quite an exciting one considering just how many games Xbox has cooking. They've made some major acquisitions, and it's only a matter of time before we end up seeing what those acquisitions bring. And if Activision Blizzard goes through between now and next year, well, you're going to have a whole lot more games to look forward to through the cloud because of this. As for myself, I'm personally excited to see what Starfield is and how it plays, as well as see more about Hellblade 2. Both of those games had really strong showings, and we've seen glimpses here and there, as well as some gameplay for Hellblade 2, but I would really like to see a deep dive on that gameplay this year around. Let me know what Xbox first-party title you're most excited to see at the Xbox Bethesda Game Showcase this year down in the comments section below. And with that, we wrapped up all the cloud gaming news of the day. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful at all, be sure to hit that like button as it really does help the channel out, and if you're wanting more content like this, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell as well. Today's end of video question is going to be a quick survey to see how many of you actually expect FIFA 23 to arrive on Stadia. I was pretty negative on the idea until today's news, and that leads me to believe that there might be a chance of it happening. Let me know what you think. As always, this has been the Virtual Cloud, giving you the latest and greatest on everything cloud gaming related, and until next time, I'll catch you in the clouds.